What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On NBA, the biggest stories with the local experts. I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, also host of Locked On Rockets right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Today, I'll be chatting with Doug Norrie from Locked On Nets, because are there any Kevin Durant suitors left possibly on the market? What about Kyrie Irving? Is there anybody out there that's the front runner to land him? Or is the best thing for Brooklyn to just run it back with those two right now? But first, a quick message from our friends over at BetOnline, because betonline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your sports betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the #1 online source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, even golf. They've got you covered for everything over at BetOnline. In fact, right now you can take a look at who the odds-on favorites are for the 2023 NBA Championship. Right now, leading the way, you got the Boston Celtics and Milwaukee Bucks, both tied up at plus 600. You got the Golden State Warriors and LA Clippers right behind them at plus 700. And then rounding out the top five, you got the Phoenix Suns at plus 900 to win the title next season. So for all of that and more odds, head over to betonline.net today to learn more about the trends and action available to you. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Joining us now is Doug Norrie from Locked On Nets. You can follow on Twitter on the Bird app at Doug Norrie. Now, Doug, after what felt like so much buzz regarding Kevin Durant, the trade request, the saga, if you will, all of that, it feels like it's maybe a little bit dead in the water right now. And I'm sure we're going to still be following the storyline all throughout the NBA offseason, eventually to whatever end it actually comes to. And we're going to talk about KD here in just a moment. But I want to start with shifting our gaze momentarily here to Kyrie Irving, kind of the other half of what the Nets are dealing with right now as far as their future is concerned. First, is there even remotely a world where KD and Kyrie are still on the Nets to start next season? And if not, right now, who in your mind are kind of the front runners that make the most sense in potentially landing Kyrie Irving if dealing him is still one of the top things on the Nets agenda?
Yeah, I think Kyrie is almost definitely going to be on the Nets. I think that one, if I were to put a bet down now, I would say Kyrie is going to be on the team. I just don't see the market. They briefly explored that. It didn't seem like there was a lot of people interested. Maybe something changes. This is kind of like, as we know, a downtime when it comes to the NBA news cycle. There's not been much in the way of movement around either rumor wise or just even speculation that Kyrie moves. I mean, he has said that he wants to stay in Brooklyn. Who knows? It's like very difficult to believe what he says on a day-to-day basis. So I totally get that. But just starting with Kyrie, and I have a slightly different version of this for KD, but just starting with Kyrie, my guess is that come opening night of next season, October 15th or whatever it is, that he will be on the team. Now, it might only be for one season and it might be up to the trade deadline or something like that. But I think that he starts the season with the Nets because I think it's just it's mostly just an other team kind of thing. Look around the league and see who has an appetite for a year of Kyrie at that money with whatever risks might be generally associated with him now. And I think it's as much about not being a market as anything else. But just from a Kyrie standpoint, I would say that he's probably on the team.
Now, you said you had a little bit of a different version of that, but for Kevin Durant. So how does that relate back to KD and your gut telling you whether he's going to be on the team or not come opening night of the season?
Okay, so I guess it's actually not different. I might have misspoken. It's different than what I think the collective NBA narrative is, which is I think they are both going to be on the team at the start of the season. That is where I've stuck with basically for the last 3 weeks after it kind of was completely hammered home when Ayton signed. If Mitchell gets traded to the Knicks because they can offer a huge package, I would further solidify every one of these pieces that falls that could have been attached to a KD deal that moves on. Like Ayton cannot be obviously anymore. Mitchell, it would be hard to imagine a 3-team trade where they were able to get enough going back to Brooklyn through a situation like that with that many assets. And so and then looking at just what the Suns, I've asked a million Suns fans, Brendan Clean and I from Locked On Suns did a crossover last week. And I basically said, what's the best offer? And basically there is no good offer from the Suns. And so they just don't have it. It's not for lack of creativity. It's just for lack of assets at this point. So I'm still firmly in the camp, and it's been called copium or whatever other, delusional thinking by a whole host of people. I'm fine with it, that I still believe that the Nets are willing to try to just stand their ground here and run it back. So because I don't think the deal is going to materialize. And so I guess I meant when I said different, I didn't really mean they're different from each other. I think it's a little different than how some of the narrative has cropped up around this, which is tied almost exclusively to historical stuff when it comes to superstars. Historically, superstars, when they ask for a trade, they get their way and they go to the team they want. This situation is just different to me. So that is, I think, come opening night, whether he is willing to play or not is different. But I just still think that KD is going to be on the team because I just don't think there's been enough real movement anywhere close to teams wanting to do this for him that have the actual assets that the Nets could say yes to.
How big of a role do you think, the availability, right, of Ben Simmons kind of plays into maybe being able to coerce KD and Kyrie into one last ride off into the sunset, if you will, right? Because if you've got a healthy KD, if you've got a Kyrie who's, actually available this season, and then you pair those two guys with a Ben Simmons, and then you look at the rest of this Nets roster, it's not a bad roster. Like, this team is not in a position where they're going to be a bottom of the barrel team. They've got so many talented players. It's all just about if you can get the stars at the top to be A, available, and B, bought into what they're trying to do.
I mean, honestly, this is what makes this whole thing such a shame at this point. Roster construction wise, at least from a scoring standpoint, this roster is not perfect, but man, it's really close. Like, they have 4 guys. I looked this up there. I did a query in this the other day, but they're over the last 3 seasons, the Nets have 4 of the top 17 players in the NBA when it comes to field goal, 3-point percentage, with like more than 400 attempts, was where I cut it off. More than 400 attempts. They had 1 Harris, 2 or 3 Curry. Kyrie was 14 and KD was 17. I think I don't have it right in front of me, but I'm pretty sure I know that's really, really close. I think Kyrie might be the only one that's off. And then you have Ben Simmons, who, when it's rolling for him, has been one of the very best 3-point assist guys in the entire league. Like, driving kick, when he has shooters around him, that is actually a core skill set that can space the floor. And then his actually lack of spacing matters a lot less, right? So in terms of overall lineup construction, just starting from that as sort of a focal point, and then moving out, and you got a guy like Claxton who can play some defense, switchable. Maybe if there's anything left in the tank for TJ Warren, like this team. I didn't even mention guys like Patty Mills that are just decent regular season guys. This team is constructed in a way that could win a decent amount of regular season games. I don't know if it's a championship level. They're probably a wing defender away, or maybe a real center away, but yeah, man, in terms of their actual, what the guys that are actually on the roster now, assuming they wanted to play, this is set up really well. What do you think about this? One of my other concerns is what you mentioned with Ben Simmons. I do have a little concern that while on paper, Ben Simmons looks good, like, top 20 player when it's going really, really well, I am a little concerned that KD and maybe to some extension Kyrie got a little look under the hood when it came to Simmons last year. And that is actually part of I don't want to run it back with this guy. That's actually that's the one other little piece that's really never been mentioned, because I don't think these guys want to throw each other under the bus. But I do wonder if during that whole drama with Simmons last year, KD was like, no way, man. I can see it. Like, I can see it. I can see how this guy's built. And it's just not for me. Does that make sense? Because that's actually my biggest concern of all the trades. The least of my concerns is actually that he took a look around and said, it's just not happening with this guy.
I think that's an incredibly valid concern when you think about it, Doug, because, right, that's the one piece, even though we look at kind of where the Nets, quote unquote, fallout kind of started, and a lot of people want to point the fingers at Kyrie Irving. And I think rightfully so, for some of the damage that he did, or, for just lack of availability, whatever, all the stuff that the Nets dealt with this past season. But ultimately, that is probably the biggest question mark at hand, because what KD brings when he's locked in and engaged. What Kyrie can bring when he's there and available, right? What version of Ben Simmons even exists to this point, right? We haven't seen him play basketball in a year. We don't know where he's at mentally. All these different questions about what he actually can provide to this team. So that is a very interesting point that you bring up there. And I wonder if it is kind of like the last thing here, but just, are you ready to be done with this? Are you kind of at this point where you want to see them try it and run it back one more time? Or are you just so fed up with it where you're like, you know what, just blow it up at this point. Just deal them for what you can get for them. Give me the assets. Like, where's your head at as far as what you want to see this team actually try and come out of the situation looking like?
Oh man, I'm 100% in the run it back camp. 100%. It's actually not even close for me, to the point where I'd be pretty actively bummed for KD to get traded, or if it didn't get run back. I understand all the context. What I mentioned about Simmons, that's not reporting that. That's like that's reading the things that haven't been said, right? No one's ever, these guys, the NBA fraternity is tight. These guys do not throw each other under the bus if they can avoid it, right? You will very rarely hear an NBA player speak ill of another NBA player. Collectively so. They're part of a union. They're part of a collective. You've also never heard any of these guys say a nice thing about Ben Simmons. They've never said a thing about Ben Simmons. And I think sometimes thinking about what hasn't been said is sometimes as important as what has been said, right? Because there's not been part of that narrative. Now, even all that being said, I'm still very much in the camp of run it back, because when you look historically at the NBA, you need to win the title, you need basically one of the top 7 or 8 best players in basketball at that time on your team, right? Like that is pretty much set. Like Giannis, Steph, LeBron, KD, that list of guys over the last decade or so, every one of those guys has been on a championship team, right? Like, and it's been when they've been a top, at worst, 7 player, and it's usually higher. They have that with Kevin Durant now. If the goal is to win the championship, you basically punt your chances at winning a championship by trading Kevin Durant, because you are not getting one of the guys I just mentioned back in a trade. And that is the group that you need to win. Maybe one day that will be proven wrong. Like, Celtics almost got it done. Suns almost got it done. They didn't. You still need one of those guys on your team. KD is one of those guys. And so as long as you have them, you work your whole NBA life to try to get one of these guys on your team. That's the only goal. And once you have them, you have to do everything to run it back. So this is me saying I do not want them to trade him. I would take an unhappy Kevin Durant back over, a very happy mix of players that are going to come back that are going to be worse than Kevin Durant. So I'm 100% team roll it back.
The 2022-2023 Nets slogan, #RunItBack, posited by Locked On Nets host Doug Norrie. Should the Nets be the team running it back this next year? What version, if any, of Ben Simmons will the Nets possibly be getting next year? You're going to have us covered for all of that and more over at Locked On Nets. Doug, I appreciate you stopping by Locked On NBA with me.
Awesome. Thanks.